4:47 a.m. Bitterroot Valley, Montana. April 2026. 340 ATF and FBI agents moved through pre-dawn darkness toward a 480-acre property south of Hamilton. 6 armored vehicles staged on the county road. Breach teams in 4-point formation stacked on separate buildings. HRT snipers occupied ridgelines on 3 sides, thermal optics sweeping fence lines and outbuilding doorways in slow, methodical arcs. Communications ran on encrypted tactical channels. Every agent carried a laminated property map and a photograph of each of the 8 leadership targets. At exactly 4:47, the operation commander gave a single word over the radio: go. What agents found inside would take weeks to fully catalog. Federal agents reviewing the fellowship's paper trail found a nonprofit registration dating to 2017. Agricultural Cooperative, 112 members. Wheat fields, sheep pens, a working sawmill in the Bitterroot Valley. Drone surveillance confirmed the operation. Tractors moving through fields, livestock in paddocks, timber stacked beside the mill. Tax filings current. Permits posted on doors. Every document agents pulled matched what the cameras showed. 40 feet below the community's central grain silo, agents found 3,200 untraceable rifles. Alongside them, 4 million rounds of ammunition, 14 belt-fed weapons, and a shipping manifest documenting 8 years of outbound sales to buyers across 22 states. The rifles had no serial numbers because they had been manufactured there, on a precision machine shop carved into the bedrock beneath the building the community called the Standing Stone. This is how a machine shop hidden under a wheat field supplied weapons to a continent. The founding elder of the fellowship is identified in federal documents only by the name investigators assigned him during the probe: the machinist. A former precision manufacturing contractor who had worked for aerospace and defense suppliers in the 1990s and early 2000s, he relocated to rural Montana in 2016 and began acquiring land through a series of small purchases that drew no attention. By 2017, the Fellowship of the Standing Stone was registered. By 2018, the machine shop was operational. Aerial drone surveillance captured the layout. Modest residential structures spread across the outer property, members moving between fields and a converted barn near the silo for weekly gatherings. At the center of the compound, 8 leadership households clustered inside a secondary perimeter, a fenced inner enclosure built around the silo itself. Body camera footage from the approach walk showed the keypad gate controlling access. Agents noted the fencing, the gate, the camera mounted above the lock. Members who lived outside that perimeter passed through it only when leadership permitted. What they did not know was what stood below. The machine shop occupied 3 chambers excavated between 2017 and 2019. Construction was staged over 2 winters using equipment rented under the Agricultural Cooperative's license. Dirt removal was distributed across multiple legitimate excavation and drainage projects on the property, making the volume undetectable in county records. The chambers were climate-controlled, humidity-regulated, and ventilated through agricultural ducts that blended visually with the sawmill's exhaust system. Inside, CNC milling equipment capable of producing completed lower receivers for AR platform rifles from raw polymer and aluminum blanks. No serial numbers applied. No documentation retained. Completed receivers assembled into functional rifles using commercially available components purchased through dozens of separate accounts across multiple states. Each purchase fell below reporting thresholds. Each account was registered to different shell identities. Agents reviewing the federal charging document photographed the relevant passage. A production estimate, written in the language of an engineering proposal, placing the machinist's output between 400 and 600 completed rifle units per year under sustained operation. Surveillance footage from the dawn raid showed what that meant in practice. The CNC setup, the finished receivers staged in sequence, the workbenches running the length of the room. 8 years of sustained operation. The equipment was still warm when the SWAT team breached. The ATF file on this case opened in October 2025. Not because anyone found the compound, because 3 rifles did. Between June and September 2025, federal agents recovered 3 firearms at unrelated crime scenes across 3 states. A shooting in Albuquerque left 2 people dead and a 3rd critically wounded in a parking structure on Central Avenue. An arrest during a drug warrant in Memphis turned up a weapon tucked behind a furnace in a row house. A traffic stop in rural Ohio that escalated after a K-9 alert led to a trunk search and a federal evidence seizure. Standard procedure: run the weapons. ATF ballistics and serialization units process thousands of firearms per year. ATF forensic photography documented what the examiner found: 3 receivers, no serial numbers, each one a ghost. But the tooling marks under magnification told a different story. Identical cutter path, geometry running across all 3 surfaces, the same finish characteristics, the same CNC signature repeated on every unit. Agents photographed each receiver side by side. The National Tracing Center flagged the cluster. These had come off the same setup. The trace ran through a Wyoming LLC, Highline Agricultural Parts, flagged on the radar tracking display at ATF's National Center. Agents pulled the federal firearms license, the registered address resolving to a mail forwarding service in Cheyenne. Body camera footage from the registered address walk showed a commercial mail suite, no warehouse, no parts inventory. The registered agent's name returned, no matching corporate filings in the Wyoming database. Agents photographed the mailbox, the suite number, the empty lobby. 3 firearms. 1 LLC. No location. No people. Agents spent 3 months building the picture before they had a physical address. What broke it open was a financial thread. Highline Agricultural Parts had a business account at a regional bank in Billings. The account received regular small deposits, consistent with product sales. It also made regular payments to a supplier account registered to the Fellowship of the Standing Stone Agricultural Cooperative, Ravalli County, Montana. Forensic accountants flagged a single payment in the transaction archive, August 2025. The payee line read, Farm Equipment Maintenance. Agents photographed the record. 1 entry, 1 date, 1 deliberately unremarkable description. The investigative team pulled satellite imagery of the property that same week. Here's what's most surprising about what they saw. It looked completely ordinary. Grain storage, outbuildings, agricultural vehicles, fields in late-season condition. Nothing flagged. No unusual heat signatures from above. No vehicle concentrations suggesting industrial activity. The underground chambers were invisible from orbit. FBI joined the investigation in November 2025. The Joint Task Force combined ATF's serialization and manufacturing expertise with FBI's surveillance and undercover capabilities. The operation was assigned a code name. 43 agents were assigned full-time. A forward staging area was established at a facility in Missoula, 60 miles north. The first challenge was simple and nearly impossible. How do you surveil a closed religious community on 480 acres of private Montana land without being seen? The answer was altitude. FBI deployed drone-based thermal imaging in rotating shifts over a 90-day window beginning in December 2025. Flight paths were varied and timed to avoid predictability. The drones flew at altitudes that kept them outside normal visual detection range. Over those 90 days, analysts accumulated 847 hours of thermal footage. The underground chambers showed up as a consistent thermal anomaly. Not dramatic. Not obvious. A slight variance in ground surface temperature along a 40-meter linear corridor beneath the silo, consistent with HVAC exhaust conducted through subsurface infrastructure. An analyst with geological survey experience identified it in week 6. It took another 3 weeks to confirm the pattern was structural rather than geological. They had found the machine shop without entering the property. The operation entered its second phase in January 2026. Investigators needed to connect the manufactured weapons to outbound distribution before they could make arrests. The Wyoming LLC was a distribution point, but mapping the full buyer network required intercepting actual transactions. Court-authorized wiretaps on Highline Agricultural Parts communication infrastructure went active on January 14, 2026. Over the next 11 weeks, investigators monitored 340 separate calls and messages. Buyers contacted the LLC through an encrypted application. Orders were placed using coded language referencing agricultural equipment. Payment moved through multiple cryptocurrency wallets before converting to cash deposits. What the wiretaps revealed exceeded the original scope. Highline was not the only distribution channel. The compound had operated 2 parallel networks, Highline for the primary buyer base, and a second channel moving weapons through a private gun show circuit across 6 states. This second channel used in-person cash transactions with no digital trail. Investigators estimated it accounted for 30 to 40% of total volume. That is the piece that remains incomplete. The gun show network's buyers were never fully identified. During those same 11 weeks, task force analysts built out a buyer profile from the intercepted communications. The customers were not a single type. Some were clearly affiliated with organized criminal enterprises. Others appeared to be private individuals with no prior records, paying premium prices for weapons that couldn't be traced. A few communications suggested buyers who understood exactly what they were purchasing and why the absence of a serial number was the entire point. One intercepted exchange, clinical in its brevity, involved a buyer requesting a specific configuration of barrel length and furniture. The machinist's intermediary confirmed the specification and quoted a delivery window of 3 weeks. 3 weeks. For a custom untraceable rifle, manufactured underground, shipped across state lines through a Wyoming LLC. It had become routine. What's striking about this case is not the scale. Ghost gun manufacturing has been a documented problem for years. What's striking is the patience. The machinist built this over 8 years. He was not rushing. He was not desperate. He was running a business, methodically, under the cover of a community that believed they were living a different kind of life entirely. Evidence collection at the county clerk's office showed what the cooperative status had unlocked. Equipment licenses pulled from the agricultural exemption window, property permits approved without manufacturing review, financial accounts opened under the cooperative's nonprofit designation. Federal agents spread the documents across the evidence table. Each one was a door the fellowship had walked through because the vetting process treated a grain cooperative differently than a production facility. The paper trail made the gap visible. By March 2026, the task force had documented 847 outbound weapon transactions over the 8-year operation. Buyers in 22 states. Estimated revenue of $14, $3 million. 3 firearms recovered at federal crime scenes were confirmed matches to the compound's manufacturing signature. An unknown number of additional matches were probable but could not be confirmed due to evidence condition. The question the task force command team now faced: how do you execute a raid on a 480-acre property housing 112 people, including children, families, and individuals who had no knowledge of the operation below the silo? What would you do at 4 a.m. with 340 agents, 6 armored vehicles, and 90 people on the property who are not targets? The tactical planning phase ran 6 weeks. Raid commanders worked through every contingency. The primary risk was resistance from leadership personnel who knew what was underground. Secondary risk: panic among community members who did not. The presence of families throughout the property meant standard perimeter compression tactics were not viable. The solution was a phased entry designed to separate leadership from general population before any engagement with the compound interior. 4 breach teams would enter 4 buildings simultaneously: the silo compound, the leadership residence hall, the sawmill, and the main community gathering structure. General population members in the outer residential zones would be addressed by separate agent teams operating in soft approach, identification-first mode. No tactical gear on those teams. Plain identification. Controlled language. It was an unusual configuration for a raid of this size. It added logistical complexity. But it was the only approach that protected non-involved community members from the shock of a military-style entry. Drill rehearsals ran across 4 nights at the Missoula staging facility. Agents practiced building entry and search protocols for structures modeled on the compound layout. A full-scale ground-level map of the compound had been constructed from satellite imagery, drone footage, and county property records. There was one piece missing from that map. The machine shop's internal layout was unknown. Thermal imaging had confirmed its existence and approximate footprint. But the number of personnel who might be inside at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in April, the specific configuration of the 3 chambers, the access points, the condition of the interior, all unknown. Agents would be going into an underground manufacturing facility with no advanced visual intelligence on the interior. That is not a hypothetical risk. 3 agents on the breach team assigned to the silo compound were specifically briefed on manufacturing environment hazards: stored compressed gases, chemical solvents used in cleaning equipment, and the acoustic conditions of enclosed underground spaces that make communication and positioning difficult. They trained for 12 hours specifically on those conditions. On April 8, 2026, the task force commander signed the final operational order. Raid date, April 14th. Time, 4:47 a.m. In the 6 days between signing and execution, 2 things happened that could have derailed the operation. First, an ATF surveillance drone experienced a navigation system failure during a routine overpass on April 10th and came down on the property's eastern tree line. The drone carried no markings. Its design was commercially available. The compound's outer perimeter personnel found it and reported it to leadership. The machinist's response, captured on wiretap, was measured. He concluded it was a hobbyist unit that had drifted. He did not increase security. Second, the confidential informant who had provided early financial intelligence on the Wyoming LLC made contact with investigators on April 12th to report he believed he had been identified. He could not specify a source. He requested relocation. Task Force Command assessed the risk as manageable. The informant was moved. The operation timeline held. If that drone had carried any identifying information, this story ends differently. The machinist had contingency protocols. Investigators found them in documents recovered from his residence. A detailed evacuation plan for leadership personnel, coded communications for triggering community lockdown, and a logistics package for moving equipment from the underground chambers to an unidentified secondary location. That secondary location was never found. It may not have existed, but it was on the planning documents. April 14th, 2026, 4:47 a.m. The operation ran 22 minutes from first entry to final arrest. Breach teams entered all 4 buildings within a 90-second window. The silo compound's outer gate was breached by vehicle. The leadership residence hall entry was through 3 simultaneous points: front door, rear door, and a ground floor window. The sawmill used a roof access team descending through a skylight while a floor team came through the main entrance. The community's general population was contacted by 18 agent pairs moving through the outer residential zones. Agents carried visible identification and made no physical contact until they had established verbal communication. The process was slow. It was deliberate. It was designed to produce 0 injuries among people who were not suspects. It worked. No shots were fired anywhere on the property. The machinist was found in the machine shop's primary chamber, 40 feet below the silo floor. He was at a workbench. Agents entering through the silo access point found him still holding a partial lower receiver he had been assembling. He did not resist. He did not speak. He set the receiver on the workbench and extended his wrists. One of the entry agents later described the chamber as cold, lit by overhead fluorescent strips, and completely silent except for the hum of ventilation equipment. Rows of completed rifles were racked along the far wall. Raw material bins were organized by type along the left side. The smell was cutting oil and metal. It looked, the agent said, like a real machine shop. Because it was one, 22 arrests total. The 8 leadership families produced 19 suspects. 3 additional individuals were taken into custody from the sawmill structure where secondary record-keeping for the Wyoming LLC had been maintained. The catalog of what agents found in the 3 underground chambers took 11 days to complete. 3,200 completed rifles. 4 million rounds. 14 belt-fed weapons. 847 pounds of raw polymer blanks. CNC equipment with manufacturing logs going back to 2018. A separate document archive, 847 transaction records, coded but decipherable, representing 8 years of sales. The federal indictment unsealed on April 17, 2026, charged the machinist and 14 co-defendants with unlicensed manufacturing, illegal firearms trafficking, conspiracy, and RICO violations based on the operation's organized structure. Sentencing guidelines for the lead charges run to decades. The Wyoming LLC was dissolved by federal order the same day. Its accounts, containing $340,000 in remaining funds, were seized. Here's what is still open. The gun show distribution network was never fully mapped. Investigators identified 17 probable participants through financial records and communications intercepts. Of those, 9 have been charged. The other 8 remain under investigation, which means investigators know who they are, but the evidence needed for charges is still being assembled from recovered records. 300 firearms from the compound have been matched to specific transactions in the recovered sales archive. That leaves approximately 2,900 rifles distributed over 8 years whose current locations are unknown. A national trace effort is running. It will take years. Some will never be found. One community member, a resident of the outer property who had lived at the fellowship for 4 years and had no knowledge of the operation underground, told investigators he had believed the inner compound restrictions were about spiritual practice and community hierarchy. He used the word ordinary. He said it felt ordinary. The machinist built something designed to feel ordinary from every angle. That is what kept it running for 8 years. One detail stayed with investigators long after the evidence was cataloged. The manufacturing logs recovered from the underground chambers showed production records for every year from 2018 through 2026. The machinist had been meticulous. Every receiver logged, every assembly run dated, every outbound shipment noted in code. Forensic accountants working through the archived shipping records found it on a single line. February 2024, a shipment logged to a destination code that appeared nowhere else in the archive. The corresponding payment record was gone, not late, not misfiled, simply absent. Agents photographed the entry, the blank field where the payment should have been, the anomaly sitting in an otherwise routine column of transactions. Investigators have no explanation for that entry. They may never get one. The network is dismantled. The weapons it produced are still out there. If you have heard anything about the gun show network or the buyers who haven't been charged, comment below. Federal tip lines are open, and investigators are still actively working this case. Subscribe so you don't miss our follow-up when the first round of sentencing comes down. This story is not finished.